Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have all 5 parts of a story by the name of I Keep Seeing Myself Around Town. I would like to give a huge thank you to the author of this story for allowing me to narrate it for all of you. It's not too often that we find a single story that goes over an hour, but we have one tonight. If you all enjoy it, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach just 1,000 likes on this one. It's always very much appreciated. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the story with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I have a good memory. I don't mean that to boast. It's just meant for context, because context matters a lot here, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe is not some sleep deprivation BS or anything like that. I have always had a good memory. I have always remembered faces, names, hyper-specific conversations, or even how the lights came in through a window in my attic at noon 6 years ago, which I have no reason to remember. But I do anyway. My girlfriend finds it charming and calls it my party trick. My boss always found it creepy, but I've never really thought much about it either way. It got sharper about 2 months ago. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Something like sharper or cleaner or more tuned in, I guess you could say. Like I'd walk into a room and remember every previous time I'd been in that room, and with such clarity that it made it feel almost physical. I started remembering dreams I'd had years ago, and remembering the names of kids I went to elementary school with, kids I hadn't thought about in near 20 years. Their faces arriving fully formed and detailed in my mind at random moments during the day. I mentioned it to my girlfriend Sasha, and she just said it sounded like my brain was finally working properly, and joked about it. I just laughed along. This was all before the news footage. I moved to the city about 14 months ago. I moved here from the big city, I'll call it, for a job that turned out to be just fine, but not great. The kind of job you keep because leaving requires way more energy than staying. It's a small city. You learn the streets quickly, and you can easily start recognizing faces at the coffee shop, or at the grocery store, or at the train station on your morning commute. I was watching the local news on Thursday evening. I'd recorded it before heading to work. Something about a zoning variance a few blocks over. Just letting it run in the background while I made dinner. The reporter was standing on a street corner doing her segment, and behind her, on the sidewalk, people were walking past in those stiff, awkward walks that people do when they realize there's a camera nearby. I wasn't really watching it until a man walked left to right behind the reporter with his hands in his pockets, and I thought, in the half second before my brain even realized, why am I on the news? I put the spatula down and immediately rewound it. The same face and height. The same dark coat that I own and did not wear that day because it was in my closet with a coffee stain on the sleeve I hadn't gotten around to cleaning. He walked through the frame in about 4 seconds, not really looking at the camera much. I watched it 6 more times. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and I know the explanation that's already forming in everybody's head. Just someone who looks like me. Just a coincidence. Doppelgangers are more common than people think. There are studies about this, somewhere in the world. Some people share your face, and occasionally, one of them ends up in the background of a news segment. I know, I had thought the same thing. The thing is, though, and I need you to stay with me here, my memory does not allow for much uncertainty. I know my own face. I know the way my jaw sits, and I know the way my nose bends slightly to the left from a break I got in high school that never set right, or the specific shape of my hairline. I know these things not because I'm vain, but because a good memory includes the things you see every day, whether you want to remember them or not. That was me. In a coat that I own, on a street I've walked down, on a Thursday that I spent entirely at work and then at home. I told Sasha and she watched the footage. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said it was probably just someone who looked like me. And then she went to bed because it was late and she had an early morning. I stayed up until nearly 2 replaying it. Here is the thing about a sharp memory that I'm only now beginning to understand. Most people, when they see something disturbing, at least have the mercy of imprecision. The details eventually soften and the memory becomes impressionistic. They remember that they saw something strange, but they don't remember every frame of it in perfect fidelity. And that softening is what allows them to eventually decide they imagined it, or exaggerated it, or simply let it recede. I don't get that luxury. I watched that footage 17 times before I turned off the TV. I have not watched it for 6 weeks, and I remember it as clearly as if I'm watching it right now. The grain of the footage, the color of his coat, my coat, the angle of his head, the way he walks. And here's the part I keep coming back to, the part I couldn't articulate until I'd replayed it in my memory enough times to isolate it. The way he walks is not right. Like, it's close. It's very close. But there's just something in the movement that's slightly off in a way that I can't fully name. Like someone who has studied how I walk and gotten 95% of the way there. I'm posting this because I need it out of my head, and living somewhere else for a while. I've been sitting on it for 6 weeks, trying to talk myself out of it. And I can't, because my memory will not let me be imprecise about what I saw. And what I saw was my own face on a street I walk down regularly, in a coat I own on a day I was somewhere else entirely. Something else happened this morning that I thought I could ignore but couldn't. And I think I need to write that down too. I'll put it in the next update. Actually, wait. I'll tell you the morning thing now, because if I don't, I'll just keep turning it over, and it'll eat me alive. I was at the coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. I ordered my coffee and moved to the end of the counter to wait, and looked out the window. He was standing on the opposite sidewalk. Just standing there, with his hands in his pockets, looking at the coffee shop, at the window, at me. He was wearing the coat, and I could see from across the street, even through the glass, that the sleeve was clean. I left my coffee on the counter and forced open the door. By the time I got across the street, he was gone, and the sidewalk was empty in both directions. I stood there for a while. Then I went back inside and got my coffee because I didn't know what else to do. I've been going back and forth about whether or not to post this update because I know how the first part read, and I know what direction people's minds went, and I'm aware that this part is going to push those people further in the same direction, and I genuinely can't do anything about that. So, here's what's been happening. The memory thing has gotten worse, or more. I genuinely don't know which word fits anymore. It started at just sharpness, as I described before. It felt sort of like a superpower at first, you know? Like my brain had finally shifted into a higher gear and just stayed there. Now it's something else. It started bringing in things I have no business remembering. Yesterday I was walking to work, and I passed a laundromat on the corner of my block, which I've walked past maybe 300 times without a second thought, and I got hit with a memory of what that corner looked like before the laundromat was there. Just a concrete lot, a chain link fence, and a hand-painted sign that said, "Parking, $2." I've never seen that before. I moved here 14 months ago, and the laundromat has been there for at least a decade, from what I was told. I googled it when I got to work, found a local neighborhood blog post from 2013 complaining about the new laundromat being built there, and mourning the loss of the parking. When I went to the images, the parking lot looked exactly the way I remembered it. I don't know what to do with that. The worst one was the carnival. There was a flyer stapled to the telephone pole on my walk home, around 2 weeks ago. It was sun-bleached and half-peeled, the kind of thing you'd walk past 100 times without registering. I registered it, and to be honest, I don't know why. I stopped and looked at it, and it was just a standard traveling carnival advertisement, faded enough that most of the text was gone. Just an illustration of a big top tent and some block lettering that said, "Marvel at the Impossible," and a date that had already passed by several months ago. And then I was somewhere else, almost like a daydream. Or, I guess, a more accurate way to describe it would be like a door opening. I was in a crowd, pressed in close, and the air smelled like sawdust and something sweeter underneath it that I couldn't place. And everyone around me was pushing forward towards something I couldn't yet see, and there was a man's voice carrying over all of it, loud and very theatrical, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our savior." And the crowd surged, and I surged with it because I was in it. I was part of it. I wanted to see, and then I saw. A cage that was no bigger than 4 feet by 4 feet. There was a man inside it, I remember, in painstaking detail, just how thin he was, with a crown of thorns at his scalp, and dried blood along his jaw, his chest struggling. He looked at me with recognition. I came back to the telephone pole with my hand pressed flat against it, and a woman asking me if I was okay, and I said, "Yes, I think so." And she walked away looking unconvinced, but I can't blame her. I don't think I even convinced myself. I stood there for a while. The flyer said the carnival had moved on. I don't know where it goes next. Sasha noticed something was off earlier tonight and asked me about it. I tried to explain the laundromat thing, and she looked at me the way people look at someone when they're deciding whether to be concerned or dismissive, and she ultimately landed on dismissive, which was probably the right call for her own peace of mind, and so I didn't tell her about the other stuff. About him. He was outside our building when I got off work. I came out around 7:45, and he was across the street, which I'm noticing is becoming a pattern. Him across the street, in the coat, hands in his pockets, watching the building. He wasn't really looking at me specifically when I came out. He was looking at the building like he was trying to memorize it. When my door opened, he turned and we made actual eye contact for the first time. I've been trying to figure out how to describe that moment accurately without it sounding like I'm writing a horror story, and the best I can manage is this. It didn't feel threatening. It felt like running into someone you knew a long time ago, in a place you didn't expect to see them. The recognition felt mutual. I could tell from across the street that he recognized me the same way I recognized him, which should have been obvious given what he looks like, but the specific quality of it was different from what I expected. He didn't look surprised. He honestly looked like he'd been waiting for me to notice. I crossed the street. I know. But I was already moving before I finished the thought, and I think part of me needed to close the distance more than I needed to be sensible about it. He didn't run this time, thankfully. He stayed where he was and let me come to him. Up close, the wrongness I noticed in the news footage was more pronounced. His face is my face. The jaw, the nose, the hairline, all of it matching in a way that goes past coincidence into something I can't name. But his eyes were wrong. Just the quality of them, the way they moved. He said something before I could say anything. His voice was mine, which I somehow hadn't fully prepared for some reason, and he said, "Have you started remembering too?" For a second, I thought he meant the laundromat, or the carnival, or any of the other things I've been trying to pretend are explainable even though I know they aren't. I said yeah because it was true, and because I couldn't think of anything else to say to my own face. He looked at me for a second like he was trying to figure something out, or like I'd done something he wasn't expecting. Okay, he said. And just that. We stood there for what felt like a lot longer than I'm sure it was. At some point I noticed the tree on the corner and the way I could see every single leaf on it individually, each one separate and distinct from the ones around it. I could see every vein and every color variation, each one its own specific thing, rather than just a part of a tree. I don't know how long I stood there doing that. I've never been able to do that before. How long have you lived here? He said, pulling me back. 14 months. He nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted, but I couldn't read it. What's your name? I said, even though I already knew. I just needed to hear him say it anyway. Ren, he said. Yeah, I said. He looked down at the sidewalk and then back up at me, and I could tell he was deciding something. The laundromat corner, he said. You remember what was there before? It wasn't a question. It was a parking lot, I said, with a chain link fence and a hand-painted sign. He nodded again. The carnival, I said. I could see his jaw tighten just slightly. Yeah. What is that? I said. What is that memory? I don't know. And the thing that got me was that it honestly sounded like he meant it, as if he'd been sitting with the same question and hadn't gotten anywhere either. I wanted to ask him 100 things. I had a whole list in my head on the walk across the street, but standing in front of him, in front of myself, whatever. Every question felt too large to start. Are there more of us? I asked because that felt like the one that mattered most. He looked at me for a moment, then his eyes moved past my shoulder. I turned around. Across the street, maybe 40 yards down, a man was standing completely still under a streetlight that kept flickering on and off like it couldn't commit. In the same coat, with his hands in his pockets. My stomach dropped. When I turned back, the other Ren was already a few steps away, moving down the sidewalk. Hey, I said. Hey, wait. I know, he said without turning around. I know. And then he was gone around the corner, and I was standing alone on the sidewalk with whatever that was across the street still watching me. I didn't go after him. I looked back across the street. The third one hadn't moved. He was just standing there looking at us. Well, at me. With an expression I couldn't read from that distance. A car passed through the intersection. When it cleared, he was gone. I stood there for a while. Then I went home and told Sasha work was fine, made dinner, and tried to let everything go flat again. Around 11, I went to the window for no reason I could explain. Halfway down the block, on the opposite sidewalk, someone was standing with their hands in their pockets. He was facing the building. I've been putting off writing about the transit station for 2 days. Every time I try, I lose the thread halfway through and have to start over. And starting over means going back to the platform. Fully. Every minute of it. I'm going to try to get through it tonight, though. The memory thing first, because it's gotten bad enough that I need to document it before I get to the station. And so you have context for why the station hit me the way it did. I can't watch TV anymore. I tried the night before last. Just some background noise while I made dinner. Same as always. And within about 4 minutes, I was somewhere else entirely. Standing in a field I had never seen. Well, whatever was on the TV kept blabbering. When I came back, I had a pan on the stove going dry, and Sasha was in the doorway asking me something I didn't catch. The field was so specific in the way basically everything is specific now, which is to say, without softening anything, every detail arriving at full volume and staying there. There was red clay and scrubby grass, a creek running along the south edge of it, and a stand of pecan trees big enough that you could tell they'd been there a long time, their canopies wide enough to block the sky underneath them. Something had been built near the trees once, and was gone now, and all that was left was just a foundation outline in the grass, the shape of walls that had once stood and fallen, and been absorbed back into the ground over however many decades it had been. And I knew the field the way I knew the parking lot, as if I'd been there enough times to ingrain it in every facet of my mind. I knew the smell of that creek. I knew which direction was east even if you closed my eyes and spun me around. I knew the sound the wind made moving through those particular trees, and the way the light came through them in the late afternoon, and the temperature of that red clay soil under my bare feet in August. I have spent my entire life somewhere else entirely. The next day I was walking to work, and I passed a street I've passed 842 times, and the number flashed in my head and wouldn't stop flashing, and the names of other streets I'd passed only 400 times, or 318 times, but one of them wasn't a number but a name, and I just kept walking, and I didn't stop. But I stood in the elevator at work for an extra 30 seconds after the doors opened, because I needed a minute to figure out what had just happened, and also because I was starting to understand that the name meant something to a version of me that had been somewhere I had never been, and that version was becoming harder to separate from the current one. I want to write the street name down, and I'm holding off, because the memory thing has gotten to the point where I believe that I've started to understand that some of what I'm carrying doesn't belong to me, and that writing it down feels like something I can't take back, and I'm trying to be careful about what I can't take back right now. There is a thing that happens now when I look at people on the streets. I notice I can hold every face individually and completely, and not the way you notice a crowd as a crowd, but more like the way you notice a single person in that crowd you've known for years, each one distinct and unrepeatable, their specific arrangement of features arriving in full detail and staying there. The woman at the crosswalk on Tuesday with a scar above her left eyebrow, paint on her right thumb, and the way she stood with her weight on her left foot. A man waiting for the bus with 3 days of beard growing in uneven patches on his jaw, and a tear in his tear in his left coat pocket that he'd tried to mend with a safety pin. I remember both of them now with the same detail as I remember Sasha's face, as I remember my own face in the mirror this morning. Everyone I pass is permanently filed. I carry all of them, and I can already feel the weight of that starting to add up. Sasha asked me if I wanted to see someone, a doctor or a therapist. She was careful about which word she used. I said I was fine. She looked at me the same way she's been looking at me for about a month now, like she's doing math and not liking the outcome, and she didn't push it. I think she's starting to count the versions of this conversation we've had. Anyway, the transit station. I take the same line every morning. I have been for 14 months. It's a 22-minute ride. I've timed it, and I've done it enough times that the stations are like clockwork. I even know when to look up from my phone without checking the map. 3 Wednesdays ago, and I now remember every painstaking detail of it. I was on the train, and I looked up at the wrong station, or what I thought was the wrong station, because we were stopped somewhere I didn't recognize. The platform was concrete, old enough that the paint had been touched up in patches, several different shades of the same off-white layered over each other across decades. And there was a sign on the wall that I couldn't read from my seat because the train car was between me and it, and I could only catch the edge of one letter. The doors were open. I have no idea how long they'd been open for. Nobody got on. I looked around the car. 2 other people, both with headphones, and neither looking up. The doors closed, and we moved. I pulled up the transit map on my phone and counted stops, and I couldn't make it work. We had been moving for 4 minutes longer than the leg of the trip should have taken, and we'd stopped somewhere that wasn't on my map. And then we were moving again, and I was sitting there with my phone in my hand, trying to figure out if I'd fallen asleep or something. But I had been awake the entire ride. I know because I remember every second of it, and the memory is so clean, and clean is how I know it's real now. I got off at my usual stop, stood on the platform, and checked the map again. The stop I'd seen had no listing. The letter I'd caught on the edge of the sign, I'm holding off on writing it down, belonged to a stop that my line has never served. I went to work, I did my job, I came home. That night, I went back to the transit website and read the terms of service, which I had never done before, and I want to be clear that I'm still not entirely sure why I did it, except that something about the unmapped stop had made me want to know what I'd agreed to when I started writing this system. Most of it was standard liability stuff, fare policies, and accessibility language. Section 14 was not standard. I'm still processing parts of it. So I'll just say that the piece I keep returning to described journey duration between certain stops as non-deterministic, and said the authority accepted no liability for duration discrepancies, and referenced a form I had never heard of, and could find no link to, required before travel past a certain terminal. And I read that section 19 times, and then closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen for a while. And the other thing. The other ones have been appearing more, not just at night outside the building anymore. I saw one at the grocery store yesterday, in the cereal aisle, and he saw me the same moment I saw him, and we both just stood there for a second with our carts. And then he turned and walked out of the aisle, and I let him go because there is nothing that prepares you for what to do when you see yourself in the cereal aisle. He looked younger than the one I talked to outside the building, or at least less worn down, and he had the coat on, and he was holding a box of something, and he put it back on the shelf before he left, carefully, like he didn't want to leave a mess, and I went and looked at what he'd returned. It was the same thing I was about to reach for. I'll admit, I stood in that aisle for a very long time. The worst one was on the train, the 20 days after the unmapped stop, the night I was in the field. I got on at my usual station, and there was one already in the car, sitting in the seat I usually take, and he looked up when I got on, and something moved across his face that I'm still working out how to name. The best I can describe is that I was the last piece of something, and now the thing was whole. I sat down across from him. We stood together for 6 stops and said nothing. The car was crowded enough that nobody noticed 2 men with the same face sitting across from each other. Or, if they noticed, they assumed brothers. Or they looked away, because looking away is always easier. At the 5th stop, he stood up and leaned down and said, quietly enough that I had to lean in, "Don't get off at the unmarked stop again." Then he was gone at the 5th stop, and the doors closed, and I sat there with that. I got off at the 6th stop, which is my stop's neighbor, and I waited on the platform for the next train, and when it came I got on, and I rode it past where the unmarked stop had been, and this time the train didn't stop there, and I sat with my face against the window and watched the tunnel wall go past and tried to see anything in the dark, and I saw something. It was the shape of the platform, there and gone in under a second, and I couldn't read it, and the train kept going, and I got off at my actual stop and walked home in the rain. I looked up the history of this transit system when I got home. which took longer than it should have because there's very little of it publicly available. And what is available is mostly technical documents and route histories that don't go back very far. There's a section in the terms of service that reference something called sublayer access, and the phrase has no definition anywhere on the site or anywhere I've researched, and the form it references has no public link, and the office it says to contact has no listed phone number or address, only a name. The office of... I googled that too, and I'm going to leave it at that. I've been having trouble sleeping, and I want to document what that actually means now because it's different from normal sleeplessness in a way that took me a while to identify. The memory doesn't stop when I lie down. Every day I accumulate, and at night it arranges itself and runs completely, at the same speed as when it happened. And there is no fast forward, and there is no fog, and there is no merciful compression of one day into the feeling of a day. There is just the day. All of it. Every face I passed, and every word I heard, and every detail I absorbed without meaning to, playing back in full, and by the time I've gotten through it, the night is mostly gone, and I'm more tired than when I lay down, and the next day adds itself to everything I'm already carrying. I read once about a man who remembered everything, every moment of every day in perfect detail, which sounds like a gift until you understand that the memories didn't shrink. Each one stayed exactly the size it had been when he lived it, so that remembering a day took as long as the day had taken, and there was no room left over for sleep, and eventually there was no room left over for anything else either. And then he died young. I think about him a lot lately. I have been carrying this city's memory for months, and I am now starting to feel the toll of it. I know it has been here since before any of us arrived. I know my memory is opening toward it, and the opening is getting wider, and the things coming through are getting older and heavier and harder to set down. And the other ones? The ones I keep seeing, the ones who are me at different distances from whatever this is. They've all been on that train. They've all passed that unmarked stop. Some of them, the ones who look the most worn, have done more than pass it, and I can see that in their eyes when I'm close enough. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying more than one life's worth of memory for longer than any one person was built to carry it. I am going to find out what's on that platform. I'm writing this down first so it exists somewhere outside my head, because the details have started blurring at the edges in a way that scares me more than anything else I've written here, and I want a record of how things look to me right now, before whatever comes next changes the shape of them. My name is Ren. I've lived in this city for 14 months. I have a good memory, but I don't think all of it is mine anymore. I think the city knew my name before I ever moved here. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes trying to figure out how to start this. That's new, by the way, the sitting and staring part. Before all of this, I could write quickly and cleanly without having to go dig for it. Now I have too much, and the problem has inverted itself, which is its own kind of hell that I'd explain if I thought I had the bandwidth. But I don't, so here's what happened. Well, hang on. I should say first that Sasha is gone. She's not dead or anything. I mean that she left, which I'll come back to, or maybe I won't, because honestly, that might be the part of all of this I'm least capable of writing right now, and I need to go through the station first, or I never will. It's been 4 days since I went, and I've started twice and stopped twice, and this is my third attempt. And I told myself this morning that third time's a charm. So, Thursday night. I got on the train at 11:15 at night, which is late enough that I could get a car mostly to myself, which I wanted, for reasons I only partially understood at the time and understand better now than I'd like to, and I sat in the middle of the car, not the window seat I usually take, and I kept my bag in my lap. I should describe how the memory had been in the days leading up to this, because it's relevant and because the only way I know how to tell this honestly is in order. It had been bad. Hell, who am I kidding? It had been worse than bad. I'd started losing the floor underneath things, if that makes sense. The stacking upon stacking of memories was getting so hard to handle, so much so that my own day would start to bleed into one I'd never lived, and I'd catch myself halfway through a thought that wasn't mine, and I'd have to pull back to the surface. And that pulling was getting harder every passing minute. Names were coming in, names of people I'd never met, first and last, arriving fully formed like someone whispering them into my ear, and then faces attaching to the names, and then histories, and I was carrying maybe 40 or 50 complete strangers in addition to everyone I'd actually met, and they were as detailed and present as the people I'd known for years, and the math of that was doing something to me I couldn't feel the bottom of anymore. The night I got on that train, I had not slept in almost 2 days, and definitely not for lack of trying. The replay had gotten long enough that a full night wasn't sufficient to run it, and so it just kept going past sunrise, which meant mornings had started arriving mid-yesterday, and I was always behind, always trying to catch up to the present day while the previous ones were still going. I was on the train for 6 minutes before the lights in my car flickered and stayed dim. I want to be precise. It was not off, just dimmed. Think a power reduction rather than a full-on failure. And the other cars ahead of mine stayed bright. I could see them through the windows and the connecting doors. Just mine was messing up. I sat with that for a moment. Then I sat with the fact that I was the only one in the car, which I hadn't confirmed until I looked, but which I'd somehow already known. 4 more minutes. The train slowed without any announcement. The doors opened. I knew the stop. I'd seen the shape of it from the window on the night I'd pressed my face to the glass going past it, which felt like a long time ago now, but really wasn't. A platform made of concrete, the same off-white paint and layers, and it was bigger than I'd registered from the window, wide and extending further back from the track than I could see from where I was sitting. A sign on the wall, the edge of a letter, one more time, just like before. I got up. I know how that reads. I know what the wren on the train had said, but I was already standing, already moving, and the truth is that I'd made this decision days prior, and I'd only been pretending since then that I still had a choice about it. I stepped off the train. The doors closed behind me. I turned around and watched the train leave. It hadn't occurred to me until it was gone that I had no plan past this point. The platform was abnormally cold, and I could hear the train pulling away through the tunnel until I couldn't hear it anymore. And then what I could hear was my own breathing, and a sound beneath it that took me a moment to identify. Water, somewhere, gathering and swelling, one drip at a time, before detaching and falling. I turned to look at the sign on the wall. Ray's Lane, Platform C. I stood there reading it for longer than made sense. The letters were ordinary enough. The station name format identical to every other stop on my line. The paint on the C was a slightly different white than the surrounding wall, most likely painted over, which I noticed right away. And the age of everything around it put that repainting at least 3 decades back. I knew this stop. That was the thing that broke through everything else. I knew it. This was inside me, mine, from the version of this city that had been loading into me for 14 months. I walked toward the exit stairs. The stairs went up about 30 feet and led out into a corridor. The corridor was tiled with traditional subway tile, white with a dark green border, but wasn't the tile pattern on any of the other stops on my line, and the lights overhead were the old incandescent kind in caged fixtures, and about half of them were working. So the light came in intervals, bright, dim, all the way down. There was another platform on the other side of the corridor. That was the first wrong thing. Just the fact that Ray's Lane was not a transfer station. No line crossed here, and it appeared there had never been one. And yet there was a second platform through an archway at the end of the corridor, and I could see it from where I was standing, and it was bigger than the one I'd come from. I walked toward it. The second platform was a waiting room, or had been one once, with wooden benches in rows, and most of them still upright, while some had collapsed. A ticket window with frosted glass, with a small half-circle cut out at the bottom for transactions, and something smeared on the inside of the glass that I didn't stick around to examine too closely. The ceiling was high enough that the light didn't fully reach it, and I couldn't tell you what was up there, and I'm going to stay with that and try not to speculate. A man was sitting on one of the benches. I stopped walking. He was wearing the coat. He didn't look up when I came in, just sat there with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and I could only see the top of his head and his hands, which were clasped together in front of him, and there was something wrong about the stiffness of him, the complete lack of the small involuntary movements that people make, the shift of the body, the turn of the head, even the rise and fall of breathing, and I stood at the entrance to that room for a long time before I understood that what was wrong was that he wasn't doing any of those things. I said his name. My name. He raised his head. I'm going to try to describe his face, and then I'm going to say one more thing about it, and then I need to move on because I've started over twice at this exact point, and I can't do it a third time. It was my face. All of it was my face. The jaw, the nose bent left, the hairline, everything I know from my mirror, and more than my mirror, because when I was close enough I could see things you can't see in a mirror, like the way the skin sits under my eyes when I'm exhausted, or the specific compression at the corners of my mouth that I didn't know I made until I saw him making it. My face. But his eyes were his, and they were full. That's the only word I have. Full. Full in the way that an overfilled glass is full, or full in the way that a room crammed floor to ceiling with objects is full, in the way that leaves no room for anything else. Full to the absolute capacity of something that had been filling for a very long time, and whatever was filling it had been filling from a source that never stopped. He looked at me, but I was not what he was looking at, because there was no space in him for anything new. I could tell he had been here for a while. I don't know how long, and I didn't ask. I think asking would have required an answer, and I think an answer would have required him to locate himself in time well enough to give one, and I don't think he could do that anymore. I think time, for him, had become what my days had started to become, layered and non-sequential, and getting harder to navigate toward any particular point. You shouldn't have gotten off, he said. His voice was my voice. I know, I said. No, he said like he was clarifying. You don't know yet. He looked back down at his hands. I stood there, and while I stood there, the memory thing did what it always did, which was accumulate. And I started to understand that accumulation here was different from accumulation on the street or in the train, because what was in this room felt different than the things above ground. I could feel the walls. I don't mean I was touching them. I could feel the age in them. And with the age came the things that had been down here in the dark for however long this place had been down here in the dark. And I could feel them arriving. I want to tell you I left immediately. I want to tell you I turned around and walked back to Platform C, caught the next train, and came home. And that was the end of it. I was down there for 3 hours. I don't have a full accounting of all 3 hours, which is new, and which terrifies me more than I know how to say. Because in all of this, the one constant I had, the one thing I had been able to depend on, was that I could remember. But I do not have a complete memory of those 3 hours. What I have is this. I sat down on one of the benches, and I don't remember deciding to do that. At some point, the other one said something to me that I couldn't fully hear, or couldn't fully understand, or both, and I want to write down what I caught of it, and at the same time I'm afraid to, because I said earlier that writing some things down feels like doing something I can't take back, and that is still true, maybe even more now than before. So I'm going to write one part of it, and the rest of it I'm going to leave where I can't examine it, because I've already been at it for 4 days, and nothing good has come from that, and the thing about a perfect memory is that you can feel the gaps in it, in a way that ordinary people probably can't, which means I know the size and shape of what I'm missing, even if I can't see inside it, and the size and shape are bad enough. What I caught was, this city doesn't lose anything. That's it. That's the piece I can write down. The rest is the gap, and the gap has a specific size, which is the size of about an hour and a half. I came back to myself. Came back is the right phrase, I believe. Sitting on the bench with my hands in my lap, and the other Wren wasn't on his bench anymore. I was alone in the room. I don't know where he went. He was between me and the exit when I sat down. I checked the platform, the corridor, all the way back to platform C, and the station was empty, and I waited there on the cold concrete for another train for approximately 40 minutes by my count, and approximately 11 years by the count of whatever was in my chest. And when the train came, I got on. I got home at 2:45 in the morning. Sasha was still up. I'm not going to write about the conversation that followed because I can't hold it in the right way yet, and because she deserves better than being rendered in a horror story, which is what this has become, and the specific look on her face when I sat down across from her is not something I'm going to commit to the record unless I understand what I'm doing better than I currently do. I'll say this much. She looked at me, at my face, for a long time without speaking, and then she said she couldn't tell anymore if she was looking at me. Not in a supernatural way. She said it very plainly, like something she'd been sitting with for a while and finally decided to say out loud. She's staying with her sister. She left the day before yesterday. I haven't posted in a while, and I know how that reads, especially given where the last part ended, and I want to be clear that I'm fine in the basic ways. I'm still going to work. I'm still eating. The memory is what it is. It hasn't gotten worse since the station, but it also hasn't gotten better, and the hour-and-a-half gap sits in the middle of me like a tooth that isn't there anymore, the kind of thing you keep accidentally finding with your tongue. I haven't seen the others in 4 days. I don't know if that's good. I looked up the office of special again this morning, and I found something I hadn't found before. I don't know if it's always been there, or if it went up recently. I'm aware, by the way, of how that sentence sounds, that not being sure if something has always been there is a fully deranged thing to say, but my ability to care about how I sound has taken some hits lately, so excuse me. There's a form. I found the form. It has a name and a processing address, and the processing address is in this city, and it is not very far from Ray's Lane. I'm going to fill it out. I know. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I've been circling for 4 days without landing on. I went to that platform to find out what was there, and I found it, or at least part of it. And then I lost an hour and a half, and whatever was in that hour and a half, I can feel it, and the city has a memory that never loses anything, and somewhere down there, in that room, in that gap, is the piece of what I'm becoming that I'm still missing. And I can't live with a gap. That's the thing about people like me. That has always been the thing. I cannot live with a gap. My name is Ren. I have lived in this city for 14 months, and I will still be here tomorrow, and I will still be carrying everything I have ever seen, and heard, and touched, and passed, and I still do not know what any of it means. But I think I'm starting to. The form has 12 sections. I've already filled out 11. I should probably say up front that this is going to be the last one. And before anyone asks, no, it's not because I'm done. I'm still here. I'm still going to work every day and coming home every evening and all the rest of it. It's because when you run something like this to ground, eventually the ground has a floor, and I've hit it. Past that, there isn't more to document so much as there is just the thing itself. And the thing itself doesn't translate all that well. I think I've understood that for a while and kept going anyway because writing it down was the only way I had to carry it outside my head, even a little. I don't need that the same way anymore. I'll get to why in a minute. For now, section 12. I filled it out on a Wednesday, 6 days ago to be precise, which I am always going to be, and I remember the light coming in through the east-facing window at that hour, the slant of it across the table, and the coffee I'd made that had gone cold because I kept reading the section and not committing to signing it, and reading it again. The 12th section was a declaration. 7 lines. The first 6 were factual. Name, current address, length of residency, primary transit line, and home stop number, and one other field that I wrote down without looking at the pen while I did it, which I think was the right way to handle it. The 7th line was a single sentence in a font just a degree smaller than the rest of the document, in a way that I noticed and could not tell you at all if it was intentional or not. I understand that submission of this form constitutes acknowledgement of prior agreement. I signed under it. I folded the form in thirds and put it in the pre-addressed envelope that had come with it, and walked it to the mailbox on the corner and dropped it in. I stood at the mailbox with my hand on the flap for exactly 2 minutes. Then I went home. Here's the thing about prior agreement, the thing I've been sitting with for 9 days, which I want to write down while I can still hold it. Before I went to the station, before section 12. Before any of the things in any of the previous parts, I thought of my memory as mine, which seems obvious in the way things do until you examine them enough times that they stop making sense. The kind of obvious that falls apart the moment you actually look at it, and then you can't get it back, and you can't remember why it ever made sense in the first place. I moved here because of a job. I've said this. A job that turned out to be just fine, but not great. The kind of thing you keep because leaving takes more energy than staying. Here is the question I've been asking myself for 9 days. Why this city? There were other cities with similar jobs. I applied to 4 of them. I remember the whole process clearly. I remember the cover letters and the phone screens, and the order the offers came in. And I remember choosing this one without being able to articulate exactly why. Just a pull, just something that felt like the right direction. Prior agreement. The form acknowledges something that was already done, and the thing that was already done was the choice. And the choice was made a long time before I sat down at a kitchen table and started filling out applications. And I don't know how far back it goes. And by God, or whatever else is out there. I don't think I'm supposed to know that yet. I'm going to write about the gap now. I've been working up to it since I started this 2 hours ago, and I keep sliding away from it, which is new, the sliding away from something, and I'm going to name that and keep going. The gap began to fill the afternoon I mailed the form, gradually at first, slow, then faster, then there. and you can't locate the exact moment it arrived. And by the time I went to bed that night, I had maybe half of it, and by Thursday morning, I had most of the rest. The other Wren, the one on the bench at Platform C, said more than, "This city doesn't lose anything." I'd caught one sentence of it and been holding that sentence for days, turning it over, and what I had was the end of a longer thing. The full sentence was, "This city doesn't lose anything, and you've been carrying it long enough that it's already retained you." I asked him what retained meant. He said, "You already know." He was right. I did know. I'd known for a while, carrying the knowing around in the same way I carry everything else now, not thinking about it directly, just aware of it, of everything, present and unhelpful. What followed, the piece that was in the gap, the part I've been building toward, is that he told me something about the others, the ones I'd been seeing on the street, in the cereal aisle, on the train. I've been thinking of them as warnings. But he said no. "They're you," he said. I said I knew that. No, the same correction as before. All of them are you, and all of them are here. It took me a while to work out what he meant by here. I'm beginning to understand. Here in the way the parking lot is here, and the field is here, and the carnival is here, the same way that this city's memory doesn't store things and set them aside. It keeps them present, all of it, all at once, at full volume, the way my own memory keeps everything I've accumulated present and running, rather than letting any of it go. What he was telling me is that every version of me who has come through this, and there have been enough of them that he'd stopped counting, which he said with the same flatness he said everything, just a thing, every one of them, is still present in the city's record. They're retained. Retained isn't the same as gone, and the city doesn't lose anything, and the gap has a specific size and shape, and the shape is the shape of understanding that for as long as it took me to understand it down there, in that room, in the specific cold of that place, which turned out to be an hour and 20 minutes. I got a letter the day after I mailed the form. It was on my doorstep, just inside the door, which was locked. I found it when I left for work in the morning. It was a standard white envelope with no return address, and my name and address in a typeface I didn't recognize. Inside was one page with my name at the top, a reference number, a form number, a date. At the bottom, below where it said "Thank you for your submission, welcome back." I stood in my doorway reading those 2 words for about 3 minutes. I could tell you the angle of the morning light, which stair creaked when I shifted my weight, how many birds were on the telephone wire above the front steps. Those 3 minutes are going to be with me at full volume for the rest of my life, and I knew that while I was standing there, which is a strange thing to know in real time. Then I put the letter in my bag and went to work. Here is what welcome back means. Here is the thing I've been arriving at for 9 days. I've done this before. The form has my name because my name has been on the form. The prior agreement is prior to my memory of it, prior to my memory of moving here, prior to every choice I thought I was making freely. The city knew my name before I arrived, and I arrived anyway. The memory started sharpening the moment I crossed into its limits. The platform was there. The bench in the waiting room has had other people on it. And those people had my face. I will be on that bench eventually, and the Wren who comes after me will find me there. He'll cross the street to get a better look, and I'll recognize him. I haven't seen the others in 5 days. The ones who used to stand across the street at night, or turn up in the cereal aisle, or sit across from me on the train. Nothing. 5 days. I think about the one in the cereal aisle, the one who looked younger, who set the box back carefully on the shelf before he left. He had the whole thing ahead of him still. The memory sharpening, the news footage, the long nights, the station, the bench, all of it still coming. I hope he takes his time. Sasha texted me this morning, just checking in, which is what the texts have been lately, careful and short. And I wrote back that I was okay because I am, in the most basic of ways. She said she was glad. I said the same because I was. My name is Ren. I've been in this city for 14 months, and I was here before that too, in whatever way a person can be somewhere before they arrive. And I think the city has always known that, and I'm starting to think I've always known it too. I went for coffee this morning, the place 2 blocks from my apartment. I stopped on the sidewalk across from it. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that I should have been cold, and wasn't. Or was and didn't register it, which amounts to the same thing. Hands in my pockets, looking through the glass at the people inside, the way the light hit the counter, the way the morning moved in there all warm and ordinary. There was a man at the end of the counter waiting for his order. He was looking out the window. At me. I recognized him immediately. The jaw, the nose, the way he was standing. I thought, another one. I thought, how far along is he? I thought about crossing the street, the way some version of me always does. But I didn't move. I just stood there with my hands in my pockets and looked at him through the glass. And he looked back at me. And I knew, the way I know everything now, that he had a coffee stain on his coat sleeve he hadn't gotten around to cleaning.